Okay, so thank you, Tim. Thank you, Leeds Lodge. So the question is, who was Jesus, or Yeshua, or Joshua, the Hebrew name? Now, I think quite a number of people here this afternoon, some of you are around about my age-ish. And if you are, then I suspect that a lot of you, like me, will have attended a Christian church or chapel when you were children. That's probably the case. And when we did, and maybe we went to a Sunday school as well, and we would have been taught, my memory serves me, that Jesus, which of course is from the Greek Jesus, was the one and only Son of God, that he died for our sins in his barbaric death of crucifixion, and that he will return at the end of time to save those of us who have accepted him as their Lord and Savior, and that he'll bring them into an everlasting paradise called the kingdom of heaven, whatever that is. All others will be cast into eternal damnation. There's much more to it than that, of course, but I think that's the bare bones of what I was taught as a child. Now, the Septuagint, that's the earliest Greek translation of books from the Hebrew Bible. This is where the name Joshua or Joshua and Jesus become confused. According to scholars Liddell and Scott, the Greeks did not have a name that was close to Joshua. And so they came up with Jesus, which is Greek, and it means healer, and comes from Greek mythology, or at least that's what I've read. Now, perhaps like me, you may have started asking some very difficult questions about these beliefs, including stories about the miracles and resurrection of Jesus. I also found the Old Testament problematic. And so at the age of 11, I came home from Sunday school, informed my parents, I'm not going there again. My father wasn't a churchgoer, and he was mildly amused with all of this. And I simply said to him, look, they're expecting me to believe all this stuff. And I'm not to question it. I'm not to doubt it. As if that was some unforgivable sin. And for me, they put the tin hat on it. So for 7 years, I declared myself an atheist. So that's my background. And then eventually, for some peculiar way, I started studying A-level scripture, as it was called in those days. And on it goes. And eventually, when I went to university, we were given the opportunity to explore a religion outside of the Abrahamic faiths. And for some reason, I chose Hinduism. And my mind, wow, things started opening up. Now, Joshua, or some people call him Yeshua, his real name, Yeshua HaNozri. Who was he? So first of all, I'm going to look at theories concerning the Essenes, and I'm sure a lot of you have heard about them. Some of you probably know a great deal, maybe much more than me. So in recent years, then, much has been written about the possible connection that he had with these. And another group that was sort of linked, Nazarenes, a mystery school which grew out of the Essene community on Mount Carmel and near the Dead Sea. Nozre, or Ha-Nozri, is Aramaic for the Nazarite, meaning the initiated who reveals what is hidden. Now, in the Essene and Nazarene communities, men and women were equal. They worked in total harmony alongside male teachers and healers. Now then, some of you are aware of the Coptic Nag Hammadi scriptures found in 1945. And this threw a spotlight on the astonishing metaphysical insights into the ancient mystery traditions, including the Essenes and the Theraputai. Now, the Theraputai were Jewish ascetics who lived in close community to Alexandria, Egypt, in the 1st century. And they are linked also with these mysterious Essenes and Nazarenes. Now, Theraputai means healers, and they were an ancient order of mystics who lived in many parts of the ancient world, but were found especially near Alexandria, the capital of Ptolemaic Egypt. Now, this pre-Christian group of Jewish ascetics, who are known today only from the writings of Philo of Alexandria, a Hellenized Jewish philosopher who synthesized Platonic, Stoic, and Jewish ideas. And Philo developed the concept of logos to mean the divine mind. And in his De Vitae Contemplavita, let's get it right, Pam, on the contemplative life, written around 10 CE, Philo compared the Therapeutae to the Essenes, as both sects were known for their exemplary religious devotion and ascetic practices. According to Philo, the Therapeutae were widely distributed in the ancient world, with one of their major settlements being in the area of the lake Mareotis in Egypt. Now then, some of you might have heard of a writer called Lars Moule. He's done a huge amount of research into Yeshua, as he calls him. 2 books in particular, The Law of Light and the O manuscript. He talks about Mariam, the Magdalena, and Yeshua HaNazari. He claims they were both Nazarenes. He further claims that Mariam, you may know her as Mary Magdalene, was an initiate on an equal footing with Yeshua, and that she probably received her education from the Therapeutae of Alexandria. Magdal, by the way, means the exalted, an initiation name indicating that she was the chosen, a spiritually advanced teacher. Now, Lars Moule has got another theory, and I don't quite know what to make of this, but he's of the opinion that she was also initiated as a moon priestess at the temple of Heliopolis. I'll leave that there. I don't know what to make of that. However, it is most possible that Mariam and Yeshua worked together, healing and teaching, and that she was probably the woman who anointed him. You will remember that story from Luke's Gospel. Now, in the Gnostic Gospels, she's described as Yeshua's companion and most beloved disciple, the only one who truly understood his teachings. The Gospel of Philip states that she is the disciple that Yeshua loved the most and the one that he kissed on the mouth. Her closeness to Yeshua resulted in tensions with Peter. And I'm sure some of you are aware of this theory, that after the crucifixion, she was the first, it is claimed, to have seen him. I'm going to come on to that later on. Sadly, the male disciples rejected her rightful place as the successor of Yeshua. She was excluded from the group and had to flee. And legends claim that she landed up in the south of France, where she lived and taught until an advanced age. I'm sure many of you know about those stories. Now, I want to have a look at, were there Buddhist influences in the teachings that Jesus shared with his disciples and followers? Well, here's an interesting thing. Some scholars have suggested that the Therapeutae may have been influenced by Emperor Ashoka's Buddhist missionaries from ancient India. Ashoka the Great, who lived from 304 BCE to 232 BCE, was the ruler of the Maurya Empire, which is the Indian subcontinent, as we call it now, and that he was this ruler from 273 to 232 BCE. He renounced violence and introduced a policy that established welfare as a right for all citizens. He promoted religious tolerance and core universal values including respect for all life. Now then, the similarities between the monastic practices of the Theraputai and Buddhist monastic practices have led to the suggestion that the Theraputai were in fact Buddhist monks who had reached Alexandria, descendants of Ashoka's emissaries to the west. It's an interesting idea. The ancient city of Alexandria in Egypt had Buddhist missionary activity around 250 BCE. Think about it. Egypt had intense trade and cultural contracts with India during that period. And as described in the 1st century CE by Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, an unknown Greek-speaking Egyptian travel writer, this is his claim. Now, if we go back to one of the New Testament Gospels, Matthew chapter 2, it is claimed that Jesus spent his early childhood in Egypt, which of course was at the end of the Silk Road. And as a result of its role in trade with the East, Egypt was prosperous and enriched with religious diversity. Now, a book that some of you might have read, published in 1995, The Original Jesus, The Buddhist Sources of Christianity. This was written by an Elmar Gruber, a psychologist, and Holger Kirsten, a specialist in religious history. They argue in their book that Buddhism had a substantial influence on the life and teachings of Jesus. Gruber and Kirsten claim that Jesus was influenced by the Theraputai, teachers of the Buddhist Theravadan school, then living in Egypt. They further declared that the Buddhist effect on Jesus' teaching is overwhelming. If you look at John's Gospel, for example, Buddhist ideas repeat verse after verse. And in 1971, a theologian, Edgar Bruns, published an entire book on this, entitled The Christian Buddhism of St. John, which astonished Christians, and you can imagine, especially the church. For example, the Buddha said, "Whoever sees the Dharma sees me." Jesus said, "He that seeth me seeth him that sent me." The Dharma, this is the great cosmic law underlying our world, which corresponds to the concept of the word, the Logos. And those of you who are familiar with the prologue to John's Gospel declares, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." That's real deep stuff. Now then, an Oxford New Testament scholar, Barnett Hillman Streeter, established as early as the 1930s that the moral teachings of the Buddha has 4 remarkable resemblances to the Sermon on the Mount. Okay. Another book that came out in 1997 by Marcus Borg, a leading scholar on Jesus, entitled Jesus and Buddha, The Parallel Sayings. This remarkable book explores the striking, and they really are, striking similarities between the teachings of the Buddha and Jesus. I loaned my copy of this particular book to an Anglican priest that I knew, and it took him a year to give me the book back because he couldn't get his head around it. He remained totally astonished by the revelations in the book, and there was no arguing. This is fact. Now then, I come back to Lars Moule again. He claimed that the parents of Yeshua were Essenes. I don't know, maybe. Like the Theraputai, the Essenes were claimed to be outstanding healers who understood the power of herbs and crystals. They were strict vegetarians. They opposed the custom of animal sacrifice, and they lived in communities where everything was shared. They dressed in white took ritual baths, farmed the land, and understood astrology and prophecy. According to their teachings, God is a pure creative energy of unconditional love. Historians of the time describe them as masters of belief, truth, and uprightness, true servants of peace. And that's Josephus, that was he said about them. And then Pliny, you might have heard of him, said, a race apart, more remarkable than any other in the world. Okay. Yeshua or Joshua, if you're Jewish, it's from the Hebrew and it means God saves. One thing for certain, he stands out as a Jewish mystic with a profound wisdom and understanding of how the cosmos works. Some claim he was the Messiah of the Jews, a reincarnated teacher of righteousness, the anointed one, which in Greek, of course, is Christos, the Christ. This concept of an enlightened teacher who incarnates from higher planes of consciousness to help those of us struggling on the earth plane, well, we know it, don't we? Anyone involved with theosophy is very, very aware of this idea. And of course, it is found in the spiritual traditions of the Far East. The Vedic tradition, they're called avatars, enlightened souls, manifestations of the heavenly source in human form. One of the oldest Vedic scriptures, the Bhagavad Gita, states, when goodness ceases to exist and injustices seize power, I will incarnate myself as avatar. In every age, I reveal myself in order to protect the good, destroy all evil, and establish truth. And whenever I've said that, people say, well, where's the avatar now then? We're in the darkest times. Where is this avatar? We need this avatar now. Good question. Anyway, worth considering is that as a result of their captivity under the Egyptians and the Babylonians, the Jews may well have been influenced by new perceptions of the divine power of the cosmos. It's possible that esoteric beliefs from Persia concerning the coming of an avatar may have been adopted by the Essenes. And prophecies concerning a future Messiah are found in the Jewish Tanakh, what we call the Old Testament. Among the scrolls found at Qumran near the Dead Sea was a mysterious book called the Book of Enoch. Some of you might have heard of that. Some scholars have suggested that the Theraputai and the Essenes were deeply influenced by the apocryphal Book of Enoch and Book of Jubilees due to their mystical value and for allegorical interpretations. The prophet Enoch describes a vision of the Son of Man being named in the presence of the Lord of Spirits before the sun and stars of heaven and the creation of the world. Mysterious, isn't it? This being is the elect one, who will be the hope of those who are troubled of heart. Could it be that Yeshua was indeed that very Messiah, long awaited by the Essenes, the Son of Man, who would show Jews and Gentiles alike how to discover the divine that is within each one of us, and how to love each other unconditionally. This is what Jesus was really about. And Yeshua's ability to heal the sick, walk on water, change water into wine, raise the dead, and teach a world-shattering message of empowerment and transformation explain his enduring appeal. But have we been given the whole truth by leaders of the religion which came to be known as Christianity? Is the Christian tradition yet to discover the real Yeshua and the teachings that he shared with his closest friends. I would suggest to you all, no, these have been deliberately buried. I'm not going to go into that and upset more priests. I have enough trouble as it is. But I suspect that things have been hijacked and deliberately pushed under the carpet. But give it time. These things are coming into the light. Now then, when I spoke with Tim a little while ago, he said, can you tell us more about Jesus of the East? I've just painted a picture to you of possible influences in the Middle East, and particularly from Egypt. Is there anything further? Right, we're now going to go into very controversial stuff. Oh my word, what do we make of this? All I'm doing, I'm throwing up to you ideas, suggestions. Let's see. So, Jesus of the East. Much speculation has surrounded the unknown years of Jesus' early life. There's nothing. The New Testament Gospels, of course, are not biographies. They are works of, dare I say, propaganda. Okay, so where did he go to? We're told the Holy Family scarpered off to Egypt with all that business with Herod and slaughtering the innocents. And then there's something about him appearing in the temple for his bar mitzvah. And then there's nothing until he's an adult. So where did he go? What was going on? Right. Okay. The most remarkable and controversial claim has to be the so-called discovery of Nikolai Notovich. You might have heard of him. A Russian historian and itinerant scholar. Was he a fraud, or is this real? Notovich apparently reached Kashmir in the autumn of 1887 with the intention of leading an expedition from Srinagar, the capital of Kashmir, through the Himalayas to Ladakh. So he was going into that area, which is just on the edge of Tibet, not quite there. People call it Little Tibet. Now, in his diaries, he mentions meeting a Buddhist Lama who spoke of the prophet Isa, who was greater than any of the Dalai Lamas. Wow. And apparently the Lama said, his name and his deeds are registered in our holy books. The Buddhist Lama apparently claimed that the most important scriptures drafted at various times in India and Nepal were to be found in their thousands in Lhasa. That might sound a bit of an exaggeration, but this is what Nikolai Notovich claimed. Now then, he resolved to try and examine these scriptures in the further course of his travels. He eventually arrived at Leh, the capital of Ladakh, and finally at Hemis, where he stayed as a guest of honor with the head Lama of the monastery. In the monastery, apparently he learned that they had copies of scriptures about this mysterious prophet Isa. Whilst there, Notovich had an unfortunate riding accident, broke his leg, so he landed up staying in the care of the monks for much longer than he intended. But it is claimed that he persuaded the abbot to eventually bring him the copies of the claimed scriptures about the prophet Isa. So apparently the abbot read aloud from this extraordinary, strange document, which had been drafted in verses and often lacked continuity, not very well written. Notovich apparently made notes of his interpreter's renderings. Now, in a summary, Notovich wrote of a short introduction to the early history of the people of Israel, the life of Moses, and how the eternal spirit of the universe, of the cosmos, resolved to take a human form, an avatar, in other words, that would show people how to attain moral purity, free the soul from its coarse shell, and so on and so forth. It goes on to say that a divine infant was eventually born in faraway Israel and that his name was Isa. Now, here it gets interesting. At some point during the first 14 years of this young lad's life, he apparently arrives in the region of the Sind, the Indus, in the company of merchants, and he settles among the Aryans with the intention of perfecting himself and learning from the laws of the great Buddha. The young Isa, it is claimed, travels through the land of the 5 rivers, the Punjab. He spends time with the Jains and later with the Brahmin priests, where he learns to read and interpret the Vedas. Now then, at that point, he causes bother because he starts teaching the lower castes the teachings of the Vedas, and apparently the Brahmin priests were outraged and they were ready to finish him off. So he had to scarper. Anyway, when he was there, Isa spoke out against the abuses of the caste system and the corruption of the priests. And he really had to get going from there pretty fast, or I think they'd have put him to death. So it is claimed that he had to flee to the Himalayas and Nepal, where he remained for 6 years and studied the Buddhist scriptures. That's a sort of that's in a simple explanation what is claimed was written in these scrolls. Now, when Notovich returned to the West, he wanted to publish his translations of the scrolls. Not surprisingly, he met with opposition from the established church. However, apparently he did publish it in 1894, and the book is entitled The Unknown Life of Christ. Around about that time, a renowned Oxford professor, Max Miller, attempted to expose Notovich as a fraud. And he claimed there was no record of a European with a broken leg having been in one of the local monasteries in Ladakh. However, Sir Francis Younghusband, the British Crown's ambassador to the court of the Maharaja of Kashmir at the time, recalled having met Notovich at the Zojila Pass, and that apparently the two of them had spent the night in a hostel while Notovich was en route from Kashmir to Skardu. Okay, right. Now here again, controversial stuff. The Buddhist texts then concerning Isa were apparently verified by others. And after reading The Unknown Life of Christ by Notovich, Swami Abhadananda of the Ramakrishna Mission in Calcutta apparently set off for Hemis in 1922. He was very skeptical of Notovich, his claims. But apparently it is said that he found the scriptures himself. He was able to read them and later published his findings in a book entitled Kashmiri or Tibeti. Now then, the next one I'm going to mention, you will all have heard of, Nicholas Roerich, the Russian professor and artist. Apparently it is said that he also visited the monastery in 1925 and published his account of the manuscript in his book, The Heart of Asia. And long before Notovich had been to Hemis, I find this even more fascinating, a certain Mrs. Harvey, whoever she was, wrote as early as 1854 of the existence of the Isa scriptures in her book, The Adventures of a Lady in Tartary, China and Kashmir. I'd love to read that. I don't know where it is or whether it's still in print, but good grief, 1854. So she found it out before the Russian chap. Now then, but at this point, let's be sensible here. The scrolls themselves have remained elusive while certain researchers claim their existence, and they claim that they have been confirmed by Buddhist monks, these mysterious writings are yet to make a physical appearance. Inevitably, therefore, doubt will persist until they do. Now then, some of you might have, the next book I'm going to mention, Jesus Lived in India, published in 1986 by Holger Kirsten. This bit I find really fascinating. He writes that Capuchin monks lived in Lhasa as early as the 14th century, hoping to convert Tibetans to Christianity. Not surprisingly, they were very unsuccessful. Furthermore, the Tibetans explained that they already knew of Isa, and they believed that he was an incarnation of Padmasambhava. As some of you will know, Padmasambhava took Buddhism to Tibet, and there was a hell of a clash between him and the Yung Drumpo and the Bon. That's another story. Anyway, Padmasambhava, Guru Rinpoche, and here are these Tibetans claiming, yes, we know Isa. We believe he was an incarnation of Padmasambhava. Apparently, the Tibetans also went on to say the teachings of Isa were completely in line with the teachings of Buddhist Shakyamuni, that's the Buddha of this age, Padmasambhava, and other enlightened beings. So the Tibetans were saying, yes, we know him. We know of him. He's one of ours. So there we are. Now then, further controversial claims surround the crucifixion and the resurrection of Jesus. We're coming up now, coming towards the end of Lent in the Christian tradition. And Good Friday will arrive, and with it Easter Sunday and the Christian claims of resurrection. There are some theories here which are very controversial. The resurrection stories, if you go and look at the New Testament writings, the resurrection stories in the Gospels offer very, very confused accounts of Jesus appearing to his disciples and even eating with them. And you will remember the story of Thomas, who didn't believe what the others were telling him. And then he appears to Thomas also, and apparently invites him to touch the wounds in his body, emphasizing that he wasn't a ghost or a spirit. So what on earth is going on here? It's really, really confusing. And I remember a number of years ago, the former Archbishop of Wales, John, who was the Bishop of Swansea and Brecon, who is a great supporter of Peace Mile, and I know him very well. John got himself into hot water, and it was published in a Sunday newspaper where he was asked about the resurrection of Jesus, and John said, well, nobody really knows. Oh my Lord, for a Christian priest, an archbishop at that, to say that, that caused a stir. But anyway, here's a question. Did Jesus somehow survive the crucifixion? We know Muslims don't believe that he died as a result of the crucifixion, but we won't pull the Muslims into it at the moment. Let's leave that there. But is there any possibility that he survived? Well, survival of crucifixion was apparently not entirely unknown. The Jewish historian Flavius Josephus wrote, and I quote, "On my return, I saw many prisoners who had been crucified, and I recognized 3 of them as my former companions. I was inwardly very sad about this, and went with tears in my eyes to Titus and told him about them. He at once gave the orders that they should be taken down and given the best treatment, so that they could get better. However, 2 of them died while being attended by the doctor, but the 3rd recovered. Okay, right. I'm going to go back. I'm going to start bringing in these strange Essenes and Therapeutae again. Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea. Joseph was a rich, very, very influential landowner, merchant, a member of the Sanhedrin who voted against the decision to kill Jesus. This is interesting. Joseph of Arimathea managed to persuade Pilate to let him have the body of Jesus. I don't quite know how he managed that, but he did. Jesus had been on the cross for approximately 6 hours when, if you remember, he was given a sponge on a stick with vinegar and hyssop, and that after taking this, suddenly he said, "It is finished." He bowed his head and gave up the ghost, just like that. Question: what could this substance have been? It is known that condemned men were sometimes given a narcotic substance that caused them to lose consciousness. The Essenes were well versed in the power of herbs for healing therapies. Joseph of Arimathea paid for a very expensive linen shroud, and he had the body quickly transported to a new stone sepulchre near Golgotha. Nicodemus, who had also declared Jesus innocent in front of the Sanhedrin, was a friend of Joseph, and it is claimed that he helped with this interment and obtained a mixture of 100 pounds of myrrh and aloe. Is it possible that both Joseph and Nicodemus were secret lay members of the Essene order or the Therapeutae, experienced healers, familiar with exotic drugs and methods of healing? Aloe and myrrh are still regarded as very effective medication for treating open wounds. Many scholars have remarked that the quantity and the quality of the ointments taken to the tomb are more in keeping with recuperation than funeral treatment. It seems strange that the brutal punishment of crucifixion, which normally took days, would be ordered with only a few hours left before Shabbat commenced after dusk on Friday. Execution on this holy day was forbidden by Jewish law. In the Gospel of Mark, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of Jacob, and Salome arrive at the tomb with ointments for the body. The Gospel of Matthew claim only 2 women came, whilst the Gospel of John states only Mary Magdalene. Here we've got confusion again, but it's women coming to the tomb. There is agreement, though, in all 4 Gospels that the tomb was empty, save for 1 or 2 men in white robes. Were they angels? Or is it possible that these men were members of the Essene order who always wore white? So we're thinking about, if Jesus did survive the crucifixion, he certainly could not risk staying in Palestine. And there are various documents claiming that he traveled to Persia, now Iran, and then on to Kashmir. Some claim that he was known as Yus Asaph. Yus means leader, Asaph means the purified after being cured of their complaint. According to numerous accounts, Yus Asaph preached all over Persia using parables. He also healed people. Who was this Yuz Asaph? Well, the tomb of this prophet is located in what is today's Srinagar's old town in Anzimar in the Kanjar quarter. The building built around the original tomb is called Rozabal, which is an abbreviation of Rauzabal. Rauza means the tomb of a prophet. An inscription outside the building explains that Yuz Asaph entered the valley of Kashmir many centuries before and dedicated his life to searching for the truth. The building contains two graves. The larger grave is for Yuz Asaph. The smaller grave is for a Shia Muslim saint, Sayyid Nazir ud Din, who was buried there in the 15th century. Both gravestones point from north to south, which of course is in accordance with Islamic tradition. However, I don't know if any of you have ever seen the tombs of Muslim saints. I have. And up on ground level, you know, there's a raised area with very elaborate cloths over them with inscriptions from the Holy Quran and so forth. Anyway, so these two gravestones within this building are actually the covers above. And apparently a tiny opening allows the visitor to look down to the actual burial chamber, which is below. And here there is something very curious indeed. The sarcophagus containing the remains of Yuz Asaph points east to west in accordance with Jewish custom. This suggests that he was not a Muslim. Who was he? Ancient documents state that a protected building was constructed around the tomb as long ago as 112 AD. A succession of guardians have protected it ever since. In 1766, an official document confirming the importance of the tomb was received from the Grand Mufti, Rahman Mir, stating, "Here lies Yuz Asaph, who re-established the Temple of Solomon at the time of King Gopadada, and who came as a prophet to Kashmir. He ministered to the people, declared his unity with God, and was a lawgiver to the people. Since then, his tomb has been honored by kings, state officials, high dignitaries, and the common people." So that was written in 1766. But are we any the wiser? Who is this Yuz? Who is he? Why is he buried in a Jewish, according to Jewish custom, whereas the other Muslim saint is buried in the Muslim tradition? It is curious. Now then, here's a real bit of controversy now. I'm not sure if any of you are aware of the Ahmadiyya movement, perceived by, well, a lot of Muslims I've spoken with over the years, whether they be Sunni or Shia or whatever, they regard the Ahmadiyyas as heretics. Let's not go down that path, but anyway, the founder of the Ahmadiyyas, Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, in 1899, he claimed that the Rozabal shrine contains the tomb of Jesus. And this view is held by Ahmadis today. And there are many Ahmadis living here in the United Kingdom. Now then, the shrine is under the care of Sunni guardians, caretakers, and they have been questioned about this, and they disagree completely, and they say, no, 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 no. This is not Jesus. This is not possible. This goes against all of our beliefs. And no, 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 no. This is blasphemous. So there we are. So are we any the wiser? I don't know. All that I have done, ladies and gentlemen, this afternoon is to raise lots of questions. But this is the quest, isn't it? What is the truth? I feel that Jesus, if we go back to the Palestinian area of his time, I feel that he certainly was linked with either the Theraputai or the Essenes, and that he was a Nazarene, not a Nazarite, by the way. That's different. John the Baptist was one of those, because you remember Jesus drank wine and he ate meat and so forth. So he wasn't that. But I feel there's a strong possibility that he was linked with the lay Essenes and the Theraputai. And then as for the Buddhist influences, that is very, very possible because of the Buddhist community in Alexandria. So that makes sense to me. That's very possible. But did he go to India? Did he go to Tibet? Who knows? I mean, these ancient peoples certainly traveled much further than most of us ever thought were possible. They did. And there are, I'm sure a lot of you are aware of the legends concerning Joseph of Arimathea, and that he apparently came to Britain and even landed up in Glastonbury and brought Jesus with him as a young man. Who knows? So many legends. Is it all made up fantasy, or are there little pointers of possible truths? I'm going to leave it there, and it's now over to you. Thank you for your patience.